Morning, everybody, or whatever time of day it is in this moment for you. So, I want to see if I can bring together some thoughts and um, reflections that really started to be set in motion. Well, even before that, right, over the last couple of years, but specifically in my last conversation with John about emptiness and grief. Um, and there's and see if I can start to bring some of my thoughts together about this, or what I'm getting from that conversation and some of the ideas John expressed that I've heard many times before with him. However, as these things do, um, the implications of them, right, start whittling into your brain like brain worms or something. I just think that process is just fascinating in and of itself. But specifically, John said something. I believe he was repeating something that he had heard from a teacher or something like that, of them saying to him that it is unwise to get into a relationship with somebody who has not experienced grief and gone through the full grieving transformation, if you will, that one undergoes when they undergo grief. So on one level, I want to look at this of like, okay, what is this connection, right, between wisdom, right, and grief? So that's one part I want to hold. The other part I want to hold in mind is this this sense of being, if we say, as pure relation, and which in some sense, right, is a pure relation, right, is we're getting really close to something like the Buddhist notion of sunyata, right? I don't think it's like a one-to-one, like, or the sunyata emphasizes something more different than maybe pure relation, but there's something really, really, like, if you think of a pure relation, it's not something, they're not things that then relate, right? It's pure relation isn't related, right? It's like, otherwise it wouldn't be pure in some sense. It's just like the intelligibility, like um, intelligibility itself is itself not intelligent, right? Intelligible, right? The level above it or below it, right? It it's intelligent. It makes things intelligible, but intelligibility itself is prior to, or above, or below, right? That which is intelligible. So this sense of pure relation and emptiness, right? Okay, so we'll hold that in mind. And then there's this other part, right, of the grieving process itself, which is essentially, on one level, we could say grief involves, right, the loss of something, the absence of something, right, the lack of something, right? And specifically, if we speak in terms of a person, like the loss of someone you love, the loss of a family member, the loss of a wife or child, or right, and this, and in some sense, right, what we're in grief on one level, what we're coming into a profound comprehension with, right, is at the bottom a kind of emptiness, a missing, a lack, right, a no longer, this no, right, this not there, this this sunyata element, right? So I want to just keep this in mind, right? So if we say the grief process at some level is actually a profound, deeply, probably like to most of our our preferences, overly participatory experience, right? But it's an experience. It when you go through it, one becomes wise in some way, or probably better said, when one goes through through grief, the way of wisdom walks with one, and in a way that someone who has not gone through grief, right? The way of wisdom doesn't walk with one in that same way. So I want to look at this sense of like of what is it? What is it that's like what is going on in relation, right? And what's going on with the loss of relation and the grieving of that loss and all the way to its, lack of a better term, its resolution, its completion, when the grief completes, what is it that you actually, what's going on there? Like, how does one become wise through that? In some sense, if we look at I want to look at it from the sense of relationality itself, right? What is it that makes relationship possible, right? In this case, between like two human beings, because we say, you and I come together and we relate. What does that mean, right? What we don't mean, right, is we don't mean we're like solid monads, right, that come and collide, right? We're 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 not just like impacts, right? And causing and effects, and it's that's not relationship, right? That's kind of collision or impacts. And think about two stones coming together. It's not like the stones are related to one another, right? It's the stones are in occupying the same time in the same space and they impact each other. But that impact like doesn't transform the stone, it breaks the stone, right? In some sense, the stone still remains the stone, it's just more pieces, right? But relationship is something else, right? Relationship connotates a sense of when I come into relationship to you, I am open to you, right? And you are open to me in such a way, right, that I reach into you and you reach into me, that very reaching, right, in some sense changes us, even transforms us, right? If you've ever been around a mother and child, right, at a really young age, you really see this. It's like this relationality, this intersubjectivity, right, this back and forth, is the way that one becomes a person. In fact, psychology, if you look at it, like most most psychoanalytic theories, right, like which have investigated this stuff from different perspectives and depth, basically all of them say that like, and it's the disturbance in character, right? You can in some sense trace down to these breaks of this relation, where the relation broke down, or the father wasn't present, or the mother was anxious, or like you can make these links between, in some sense, the way I struggle being a person, right? Back to those original relations, right? This is kind of like psychology 101, right? So what is being understood there? Like, what do we understand with this, right? Like, what is it that affords relationality? And in my conversation with John, I really got this sense of like, oh yeah, there is what must always already be present, right? Is this openness, right? An openness, right? That that in some sense doesn't deny my boundary between you and I. In fact, its difference affords is what makes us to be able to relate, right? So it's like it's an openness that allows difference to be the very openness of relation. In that same way that in that same way that boundaries, like of a house, right, gather the hospitality, and in one sense they keep everything not in the house out and everything in the house in, but that very boundary affords the ability to open and bring in a guest, right? And to welcome them. And in such a way that the guest comes in a way that, in some sense, hopefully, in some way affects what's inside, but in a way that deepens the home, right? A welcomed guest, right? You could say is someone who, you know, their entry into the family, into the household, draws out hospitality to us, and that hospitality and them being the host, right, in some way relates back to the home in such a way that deepens it in some way, changes it in some way, right? So this kind of, that at the bottom of it, we have to say that there's an emptiness, right, that is like the silent partner. It's the thing that's not, it's the non-objectifying thing that we can't ever point to, but it's the it's the silent allowing that garnishes the very openness to the other and the other to me. And that back and forth, right, is is presupposes this kind of openness, right? Sunyata, emptiness in some very real sense. So if I haven't lost anybody and have not gone through the grief, in some way you can imagine that there's a certain kind of idolatry that I can start to have with the other, right? Like, because I've never had to confront the absence of this person, right? All I can maybe relate to is the presence of the person, if you will, right? The existent things of the person. And and because I'm not awake to, in a deeply real sense of the reality of the emptiness that affords this, right? As John said, as he was quoting, I think a Zen master, you know, as you come and go, or emptiness comes and goes as you come and go, right? Emptiness comes and goes as you come and go. Now, that sense of like, no, I'm not talking about emptiness in the sense of like static space, right? Or absence, right? And so I don't mean emptiness in the sense of like there's empty space and let's say a bird flies through that space, right? So in that sense, we would say the space stays still and then the bird moves in that space. Instead, let's think this differently. Let's think space is co-arising with the bird, right? So it's not so much that the bird, in that some sense, moves through space. No, it's a little bit more like this: the moment that the bird is the moment that the space is. The space that allows the form of the bird to be, right, in space is co-arising with the bird. They co-arise together, right? And to take it even a little bit deeper, we'll say that, well, what about inside the bird? Is the space just co-arising in such a way that it just kind of surrounds the bird, and then the bird's occupying space? Well, what happens to the space when it's occupied? Well, if it goes away, then what allows it to be occupied, right? Like, at some level, even occupied space needs space for it to be occupied. If the space goes away, then if that space goes away, then it can't, there's no space for it to occupy. Okay, so you can see this all the way down, right? This all the way down, this co-arising of this silent partner of space, right? And the form. Okay. So in some sense, when I relate to you without having gone through grief, right? There's a way in which I won't totally be in full relationship with you. And in some sense, it's in the loss of you, right? That I am confronted in a visceral way with what has been the nature of you at some level that has been present but unapparent to me the whole time. And perhaps that, and perhaps in some way we can think about this, and because it was unapparent to me, right? Because I've not participated in grief, I've not gone through the transformation of grief, right? In some way, I don't even know that I'm not related to some part of you. But at some level, I associate you, right, with your all the different forms and content of you. And I bind to that without knowing, without it all being relating to your death, my death, the the finitude, right, of every existent thing. And so, especially in like romantic relationships or deep attachments, right? Somebody that you've like, family member, there's a the the binding, right? The binding can go so deep, right? All the way down to the very nub of us, right? The very core of us. And so in some sense, the loss, right? The loss, we think about this as the loss of the person, but actually what we confront is the fullness of the person. Because that emptiness that you confront in grief, right? And as you work through it, it's an emptiness that stops as the process of grief goes through, right? As you kind of go through the different, stages of grief and like, the bargaining and the sadness and like the ache and the hopelessness and like the feelings of total annihilation in some sense and despair that one participates in, let's say. In some way, maybe what we're experiencing is the final kiss of the person, the fullness of the person. That that emptiness, in some sense, was the deepest, perhaps the deepest truth of that relationship with that person. And that, like, on one level, in one way, that which we can grasp onto and idealize, idolize, right, have a one sided relationship with, when that part is ripped away or goes away, in some sense, at one level, that goes away. But in another level, something else becomes an aspect of them, right? And an aspect of you comes into the foreground. And at first, right, that association is with the form of that person. But then, so at first, it's more than lack. It's like, there's nothing like the pain of grief. Like, this is nothing like that. It's not sadness, right? It's like, it even registers in the pain centers of your brain. It's like, it's not, it's like, it's a total, it's its own thing. And so you're, in some sense, you're confronted with what you have not been in relation, right? With when you were in a relationship with them, right? Yet you're seeing something, you're starting to get the very beginnings of that silent partner, right? that one that presupposed and came and went as they came and went. So, in some sense, the very depth of that person in the experience of grief is the final kiss of that relationship. It's the gift of that relationship. However, and I think here comes the wisdom part, that kiss is a kiss that endures throughout one's entire life. Because that kiss is within that final kiss of them being gone, right? In some way awakens, shows what cannot be seen, cannot be grasped, right? What cannot be optimized, like owned by you, controlled by you. And as one undergoes that grief, one can then start to recognize, and I'm not talking about in a propositional sense, something much deeper than that, right? That in some sense, that person was truly an icon to what that emptiness, that pure relation, that that silent partner, right? That we couldn't have noticed beforehand. A deep sense of that, right? That was their final kiss. Yet it's a kiss that then one can start to implicitly see in all their relations. And it's interesting because if you think about this, and then this one then goes into another relationship, them at some level being able to viscerally participate in that sense of emptiness, right? That affords the relationship itself. If one is attuned by this emptiness and attuned to it in some deep way, my ability, right, to even more profoundly be related to the next person I'm in a relationship with is going to be much deeper because my gaze will include, right, it will include this sense of impermanence that also points to what affords this coming and going and what comes and goes with it, right? And in some way, because I will probably be less, I will be more devotional without being idolatrous. Put it like that. I think that's good for now. Thank you.